Welcome to our 102nd podcast. Today we're talking about cross-cultural challenges in global change initiatives. What's one thing you can do to keep your global teams engaged and aligned with your change initiatives? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants to explore and challenge workplace issues and to build better ways of working. It's a blend of theory and practice, grounded in real-world experience, working with organizations of all sizes across a wide range of industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want fresh ideas about the workplace, or just enjoy listening to consultants talk candidly about how to make work more effective and more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. Welcome back to our podcast. I'm Rich Cruz, an organizational development consultant, and joined by the amazing Ben Kleinman. Hey, Ben, how are you?
Hey, everyone. Hey, Rich. Amazing. Wow.
Amazing. Because, Ben, we are going to be talking about something that is on the minds of a lot of people, and you've had some experience in the global marketplace quite a bit, haven't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had of the choices that we had of what to cover today, covering cross-cultural issues that happen with global changes, right? Is near and dear to me. I know it's on the minds of a lot of other people, and you certainly have done your fair share of this stuff. So, in all of your amazingness, Ben.
Wow. Not like setting the bar high from the get-go, are we?
I'm selling you, man. I'm selling you.
I think it's certainly in this day and age. I think it's pretty fair to say that most of the people that we've probably come across at work have had some degree or another of cross-cultural work experience, and that doesn't have to be quite as highfalutin or as complicated as you flew across the world and had to embed yourself in a company for 3 months while the company was completely reinventing itself, and you didn't know the language and you didn't know any of the people or, any of that kind of stuff. I mean, it's as simple as, one of your coworkers came from a different background, and how do you get to know that person, and how does that person get to know you, and all of those kinds of things, in the same way that you would with a neighbor. Who might have moved to your neighborhood from a different area. And so it can be as simple as that. And I think most of us have probably had some kind of experience similar to that, where you try to figure out, how do you get to know someone who may have a slightly different background or slightly different work experience than you did. And, here I think is where some of the cultural impact, cultural experiences can really shape how that interaction goes.
Sure. And I think our living in Chicago, right? We've had exposure to and experience with working with people from all different types of backgrounds, because this is just a central hub for trade and IT, med, all of that stuff happens in this area quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, most huge cities are pretty pretty international and cross-cultural and things like that. And so the working force in that region is just going to pick up a lot of those people. And there are a lot of global companies headquartered here in Chicago or in the Midwest in general. And so you do see a lot of that influence in terms of how a given company is set up. I mean, Rich, you were doing some consulting work with a company that was kind of between headquartered here, I think, but had Canadian headquarters and a U.S. headquarters, and there were some things that you had to negotiate through there, and all sorts of things like that. I was doing some consulting work with a pharmaceutical company that was headquartered in Japan that was global, and so obviously a very different kind of influence than a company that I've worked with that was headquartered in New York or that was headquartered in Los Angeles, and just very different kinds of cultural milieus in the working environment. So yeah, we can dig into all of it.
You brought in the French, man.
Where would you like to start?
Well, I think maybe a quick definition
Okay.
if you will,
It's always a good idea.
of culture, right? So given a little historical, or not historical, but a little basis for culture, right? And we've talked about workplace culture several times. We brought in like Edgar Schein's model of the underlying assumptions. Those are those unspoken beliefs of a group, right? I'm not even gonna say workplace, but when we talk about
Sure.
Ed Schein, it's about that, right? But so it's those underlying assumptions that beget the values, the espoused values. So those are, and there's a thing is the verbally uh, and written expressed values of whatever that group is, and
Yeah.
then there's the artifacts, right? The outward signs, symbols, behaviors that stem from that. And we can apply that, I think, to not workplaces, but of course, cultural or geographic regions, um,
Sure.
you know,
Sure.
religions, and ethnic backgrounds and all that stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Sure. I was just going to ask in maybe more layman's language or, from my very small brain, it's sort of the difference between what you were talking about in terms of the Shine model and the artifacts and things like that. It's maybe the difference of what is something that is written on a poster or that's given in a training or that a leader says in quarterly update to Wall Street that might be the same or might be different from how things are lived on the shop floor or how things are lived in a given meeting or how things are lived at the water cooler or on a conference call or something like that,
Sure,
a virtual
sure,
meeting, what have you. Those things can often be quite aligned, and it's great when they are. And those things can often diverge pretty broadly.
right. Yeah.
And it's a
Well,
little more challenging when they do because then people feel like there's the public or the officially stated, this is our culture, these are our mission statements, these are our values, and then there's the underlying, okay, this is really how things work in this company, and it can be hard for new people, and especially for people who don't understand that kind of cultural way of working
mhm,
because they didn't come from that at a prior company, they didn't come from that in their prior country. That can be very hard to adjust to. So that cultural difference can really be, um, it can be a challenge, quite a challenge if you're
absolutely.
not used to that.
Sure, sure. And then even within organizations that have more of an established and express culture with a value statement, a mission and all that stuff, you still have subcultures that appear regionally, and like you said, even around the water cooler, you could have your own water cooler subculture that occurs, right? And those, for better or worse, either or two, right? Because it could be those could be some of those potential task forces that could bring about positive change, right? Um, we've talked about some leadership models like Who's and Posner's leadership challenge, where challenge the process is part of that issue, or that model there, right? And so those people around the water cooler could be going, oh, I think we need a change here or whatever, right? And so they can develop a an alignment that is different than what has been established in an organization, right? And that's besides whether or not it's a global organization or something that's hyper
Sure,
local.
sure.
So
Or even just functionally or on a given team. You could have a team that's got a very
absolutely
given type of culture and another team within the same company, within the same region, on the same project that's got a totally different culture. So
right.
I'm sure you've seen it too, where I've been on projects or initiatives where you have more research and development type of team, experimental, very move fast and learn very quickly, fail fast, and learn from that and iterate. And then you have other things that are maybe more. Um, operational, or they like to be very steady state. They're very cautious, and putting those two together when it works well is great, because then you get this really great engine of innovation, and then it's built out and you productize it, or you commoditize it, or you
Yep.
serviceize it. And then you have other ways where it's just a little bit, like people don't quite understand how to work. And you've got one group trying to move really fast and just figure it out. And another group is like, well, we can't even hold a meeting until we know everything about what's going to happen in that meeting and who's going to be there, who's going to say what, and what's the outcome going to be. And so it's like, why bother having a meeting at that point? So
Well,
it's just,
sure.
it's really, really fascinating stuff. But I think
Absolutely.
that's, just it's just like how big is our cosm? Is it a macrocosm, a microcosm? I mean, I've heard people talk about it at Zoom levels. Are we talking about like the coordinates on a map? Are we talking about the satellite flyover type of view of the Earth type thing?
Right. For sure.
And how do you want to zoom that out? So,
Yeah.
woo.
Um, we are just about a time to take a break here. But when we come back, let's jump into, getting into that um, that larger picture, right? The global aspect of
Yeah.
what we started with, right? I think that would be a good place to go.
Super.
Great. We'll be right back. In a world where leadership needs clarity and action, and HR gets left out of the loop, one hermit crab steps in to save the day, only to be shut down by management. From the creators of Hermie the HR Hermit Crab and the Harmonious Workplaces podcast comes a new shell-shocking adventure, Out of the Loop into the Fire, or HR Hung Out to Dry. This book blends workplace satire with evidence-based lessons, reminding leaders that culture, trust, and people strategy don't exist as extras. They form the foundation of lasting success. Whether you work as an HR professional, a leader, or just someone who has survived a few too many staff meetings, Hermes stories will make you laugh, think, and maybe even change the way you see your workplace. Purchase Hermie the HR Hermit Crab, Out of the Loop, Into the Fire, or HR Hung Out to Dry, now available on Amazon and Ingram Spark. Shop now at harmoniousworkplaces.com/HermieHRCrab. That's harmoniousworkplaces.com/HermieHRCrab.
Huh. They changed your Fred.
And we're back. All right, Ben. So we're talking about cross-cultural challenges and global change initiatives. And before we went to the break, you were talking about the being hyper local versus the global part. So maybe we start with that larger aspect of things, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Sure. Sure. Uh, One of the things that was really apparent to me working in an organization that was very much, it was headquartered in Japan, and that sort of mindset, or that kind of cultural way of being, had infused much of the way that each of the regional um, company organization structures were set up, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of in Japan versus, or in I understand in many of the Eastern countries, there's a lot more of a sense of not quite do what you're told, but it's a sense of people will essentially sublimate or subsume some of their personal sort of Western. In the West, we tend to do a lot of stuff individually. We tend
Right.
to have a lot of individual ego-driven activity, and in many of the Eastern cultures, it's a little bit more group focused.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
realize this is broadly
It,
stereotypical, but the
no, but
sense
yeah,
at
yeah.
that
I mean, the
company,
individualization, individualistic cultures in the West versus collectivist cultures in
collectivist cultures in the
yeah,
East,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and gross oversimplification, but at this
Right.
company, there was very much a sense of it's a collectivist approach in general, as opposed to other countries' approach, or other companies where I've worked, where it's very much a individualistic approach.
Sure.
And the other aspect that was very, very strong was essentially, regardless of the region, even in the US, everything sort of rolled up. And there was basically a very, very strong hierarchical culture. So
Sure.
essentially, whatever you did had to be blessed from on high, and there wasn't a lot of room for deviation or experimentation or kind of what if thinking. And in a given region, whoever was the top dog was really the top dog and had quite a lot of say versus what you might find at other types of companies. And I just found that so different from many of the Western based cultures where there are often very hierarchical structures. And it might be the same thing where you have someone who, in a given region or in a given function, rules with an iron fist, but it's a slightly different mentality where people still feel like in a given meeting, they can say what they need to say, or even in a given project, they can kind of have some agency to do what they feel like is the best way to achieve the ends of that project, and that was very different from that collectivist approach. And so it was very interesting, and curious. Have you seen that play out in some of the companies or projects you've been working on?
Yeah, sure. I was working for, so it was a an acquisition of a US based company that was brought into an Indian conglomerate, right? And I um, it was interesting how they allowed the US based company as an asset as their only US um, component to their portfolio. They allowed them to continue to operate in that kind of Western philosophy, right? So they allowed them to continue to operate in that
Mhm,
kind of individualistic and um how do I put this, where the individual contributions were celebrated and
mhm,
um but it was interesting that the so I had a chance to meet the CEO. The company is based in India, but they had moved their headquarters to Dubai. And I had an opportunity to meet the CEO and talk to him. And he was so integrated into the company that, it was really, he was part of the daily team. Like he was in the meetings, he was in part of the work, right? I mean, he certainly understood he had a multi-billion-dollar business that he's running on a global scale, and very cognizant of the fact that he had, a people in, or he had organizations in Africa, the Middle East, India, some in South America, so he was very cognizant of this, but and he really was able to invite people. And that was the interesting thing for me, was it was not a you do this way because this is the way the company is done. It was more of an invitation to come in and experience how this is. So she invited me to come in and share a meal with the rest of the team, where they provided a lunch literally every day, which was just amazing to me, right? And it was to foster communication and camaraderie. I I I was very, very taken by how they operated, because everything was about us. We are doing this. We are, um, we all raise each other up, uh, and our contributions are what make this company move forward. Um, which is very different from some of the almost factions in the U.S., where we had different product groups, and the different product groups almost competed for resources, which
wow,
is interesting, right?
wow.
Where over
I wanna go
there,
work for that guy.
I know he was he is. I think
Sounds
he's
like
still, I
a
think
a
he's still
rare
around.
gem of a leader.
Yeah, he was remarkable.
That's great. Wow.
And and I mean, I've certainly seen some other places that have operated that way. No, I'm not saying that it was, picture perfect. I was brought in
Sure.
because the the global marketing team, we needed to make sure we were all operating with some cohesion, right? And that's difficult in a global environment, to have people work collectively and cohesively when your marketplaces are decidedly different. The needs of somebody in Europe are, especially with a like personal care products as were vastly different than
Oh, sure,
what we
yeah,
have here, right?
sure.
But I've also seen that with construction manufacturing, right? This German company that I worked for, they were based in Germany. I reported to the UK. I was in charge of what was happening in the US and Canada, right? So lots of different cultures to deal with, in that
Mm-hmm.
aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention a very strong South American component
Oh, wow.
to
So
all
very different
this.
regions.
Very different regions, very
Yeah.
different ways of thinking of how projects are done too, right? And how they allocate. It's
And
remarkable the difference between even like Canada and the United States is.
oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I was just going to say that's all quasi-Western. I mean, you have Europe, Canada, the United States, Latin America. Um, Even within that, it sounds like there was a lot of variability,
There is,
and
yeah.
and that's just wild. And your comment about working for someone who is acquiring a company made me think of even, and I know we're still trying to stay at that very macro level,
Hmm.
but even within that westernized approach in the US, you've seen, I mean, I was working for a company that was a smaller IT consulting company. We were acquired by a smaller, let's say slightly bigger mid-size IT consulting company that was headquartered in Australia.
Mm,
And then that was bought out by another company that was headquartered in France. And it's just like these different things. And I see, and I'm curious if you see this too, when one company acquires another, typically they're buying it because they like the product that's being made or the services being offered, or they just want to acquire that customer base and gain market share.
sure.
Invariably, you see it where one of the components of that is on paper, they say, well, we love this company. We don't want to destroy the innovation engine, or we don't want to destroy the way that they market their product or their
Right.
services, or
Right.
we don't want to disrupt their ability to serve their customers' needs, whatever it is. And the other company comes in and within, I mean, it's amazing if you're on the inside within months, that is completely the opposite of what often happens, where the innovation engine is completely destroyed, or the ability to service customers the way that they had been is completely destroyed, or changed just enough that you can't do it the way that you used to. So whatever it is they're buying, they disrupt the secret sauce just enough
Sure.
to where instead of having this really beautiful recipe, it's now like this, it's
Yeah.
okay, not great, doesn't taste as good. And so you always sort of look at that and go, well, somebody must have been thinking this was a good idea, but did they really think through all of these things? And I
Sure.
have to believe that some of it is, people are just looking at the financial component of it, but in so many cases, it seems like the cultural aspect is so critical, and that often gets maybe not overlooked, but it doesn't get given enough attention to where people come in and say, well, whatever it is we're buying, we need to protect that in such a way that it stays true to what we're buying and what we're acquiring and why we're acquiring it. And we need to somehow harmonize because we can't have two different companies,
Sure.
but
Sure.
we need to figure out how to continue to enable that culture that made that such a special entity that we're buying. And I feel like
Right.
that I I don't see, and maybe you have, and again, maybe it's just my somewhat myopic view, but I don't see that working out very well a lot.
Yeah. I've my experience with like, and I know this is kind of going off on a bit of a tangent here, but my experience with like private equity.
And maybe your tangent will bring us back to our original
Well,
thing because my tangent
maybe
took us way off.
no, no, that's okay. 'Cause we do have to take a break in just a couple of minutes here, but you bring up a good point. Like, there's mergers and acquisitions that can be done from like a third party, like private equity company or something like that, where it is purely an asset. It comes in, they like you said, they're coming in because they see some value to this. But there's also this idea that they're going to turn around and maybe sell this again, at some point.
Yeah.
And I think one of the differences that I saw with my example, right, was that um, the company, the global firm based in India had actually purchased this asset and said, we're holding on to this. We need to make this really work for us, and actually kind of turn it around because it was kind of bleeding money in the U.S. for a while. Um, but we need to turn this around because this is our U.S. asset, right? This is our connection to the U.S., and so we really we really value this because it's an entry into this marketplace, and so the sense of I don't want to say permanence, but because none of these things are permanent. There's going to be times where something needs to be divested or whatever, but the idea that it really needs to become part of the portfolio and needs to become part of the way that we operate as not just an organization but as people. Um, I think that's the difference between that and maybe a company that is really just commoditized, right? That
Hmm. Hmm.
they're brought in as something that is going to be on the shelf and improved to a point where the numbers look good enough to be able to turn around does that kind of make
Oh
sense?
yeah, completely makes sense. Yeah, completely makes sense. I
And
think for
I've
yeah.
seen those, where it's the alignment is not necessarily there. They may even take or do a buyout of the executive leadership and say, no, we're going to make this our own thing. Thank
Hmm.
you, but no, thank you.
Right.
And that
Right.
that is I've seen that turn around to the numbers look good, but the people can be
A mess.
miserable.
Yeah. That's hard to sustain long term.
Sure, sure. But
That's where things get
it's
very
not,
tricky.
yeah, it's not intended to be sustained long term because,
Yeah.
well, Ben, we're just about time for a break
Okay.
again here. When we
Cool.
come back, let's just pick it up.
I was going to say, when we come back, maybe we start talking about different ways companies can approach this type of
Oh yeah, sure.
challenge and figure out or think through or suggest some ideas around how to make it a little bit easier or better, just based on our experiences and kind of best practices and stuff.
Right on. Sounds perfect. All right. We'll be right back.
Oh, hi. I'm Hermie, the HR hermit crab. So, I have a quick question. Have you ever had that one employee who knows how everything works, but if you ask them to write it down, they say, "Oh, it's easy," and then don't write anything down? Yeah, me too. Try getting Hermione to share how she sets up her spreadsheets. Sheesh. Here's the thing, when knowledge stays in people's heads, performance gets wobbly. Training doesn't stick, new hires struggle, and suddenly everyone's asking, why did this used to work? That's why we talk about the knowledge to performance tree model as featured in TD Magazine from Harmonious Workplaces. Knowledge forms the roots of an organization's value. If you don't capture it before people retire, resign, or burn out, performance doesn't grow. You see, you can buy new systems, you can launch new initiatives, but without the roots, you mostly grow frustration. Anyway, I'm Hermie saying that Harmonious Workplaces is here to help you keep the good stuff from walking out the door. Make change your friend. Bye.
And we're back. All right, Ben. So on this last leg of our journey through global teams and change, um, you teed this up with maybe some tips or at least some ways that we have observed making these global changes work well.
Yeah.
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 What do you got?
I well, this is probably not going to be amazing to anyone, but it's just maybe a hard won experience or hard lessons learned in terms of if you really want to do right by your people, just be open and honest about it and be upfront about it. And, just say, look, this is a purely financial transaction. We're going to squeeze as much value out of it. We're going to buy some people out. Other people are going to stay. And it's really about maximizing the dollars. And it's probably too blunt, to be honest. It's probably too blunt for most people, but that's really honesty is the best way to treat folks because then they just have an understanding of what they're in for and they can make the decision about how to move forward.
Sure.
You
Sure.
can't do that, and I realize that that is very aspirational, or maybe not the best idea if you're trying to retain people for a slightly longer run so you can extract more value out of it and then sell it, that kind of thing. But, in general, I think just the honesty, uh, what we were talking about before, is this a culture where it's very collectivist? Is this a culture where, whether it's Eastern or Western, collectivist or individualist, where there's one person and that person rules the roost? And if you try to say something that's maybe slightly out of bounds, you're going to get your hand slapped. And despite what posters are on the wall and what we said in the interview when we were thinking about bringing you on board, this is the way it really works. Just be open about that because
Yeah.
bringing someone on and having to let them go or having that person quit, the churn is far more destructive than just being open and honest about
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
from
Yeah.
the start. So I
Yep.
think a lot of that honesty and thoughtfulness and communications, um, giving people a sense of what type of company it is. And I
Mhm.
would put it on the onus on other people too, in terms of if you are finding yourself coming into a company that might be different based on your experience, try to learn as much as possible either before you come in or while you're there.
Mhm.
Sometimes we don't have a choice, we get acquired or whatever, but try to learn. And it's really about having that curiosity mindset, that open mindset. And so, regardless of where you sit, understand the culture, try to understand how you can learn about those other people. And let's just say it's the this most sunny day scenario. You're working with people across the globe, different culture, different languages, different time zones, different backgrounds, all that kind of stuff. That same idea of having a learning mindset, a sort of open mindset where you ask questions, where you try to understand more about the people you're working with, more about those differences, looking for some of those subtle things like, is this person coming from a culture where things are explicitly said?
Mhm.
Traditionally, stereotypically, a very Western approach. This is on my mind. I'm going to say it, and then we move on,
Sure.
as opposed to a more traditionally, stereotypically Eastern approach where I'm not going to say anything out loud. My body might behave in a certain way that suggests this is not a good idea, or my
Sure.
behaviors before and during and after a meeting might suggest that I don't fully believe in what you are telling me, or I don't agree with the comments that you are saying, but they're never
Mhm.
going to say that out loud. And so there's like
Sure.
subtle messaging that goes on. Those kinds of things, you just have to try to be as aware as possible and really use your listening and learning skills.
Right. Another thing that I found, that some organizations have done exceptionally well, um, and some have tried and not so much, but the ones who have done it well, um, they may speak of kind of subcultures, but it's not really, because it is actually kind of part of a sense of belonging. Is that they will create some like special interest groups within the organization, right?
I love that.
And
Yeah.
then yeah, so there's certainly like there was a one organization where there was a Pacific Islander group, there was uh, an African American group, there was a Latin group. Of course, there were other groups like LGBTQ
Mhm.
and
Women leadership
women
groups are very
leaderships.
common. Yeah.
Right, right. And then giving them a voice where it could be a lunch and learn or some kind of an immersive experience where you're opening up the dialogue, for people to be able to ask questions about how to navigate uh, conversations, those types of conversations that um, I found this to be very effective because um, like for instance, I remember I was working for a national hardware company as a consultant, and they had it was a Filipino group that they had there, right? And so they talked about the Philippine culture and their shared values. They even had somebody do perform a dance. Uh, the tremendously awesome food that
That's
they
so cool.
had to, and we were able to then ask questions, and we're sitting breaking bread together, talking about you know um, what what are the interests, values, and the like, and I think that's one of the things that happened with that other global organization when I went to Dubai was sitting there. And so it wasn't really special interest groups. It was there was an invitation to come talk and become part of the group, ask questions, but not only ask questions, but they were very open about sharing. Um, you know, uh, I I am Buddhist, and this is how I navigate this, and this is why I won't partake in even like uh, why I'm vegetarian, that type of thing, or I'm Muslim. And so this, I, have set aside this prayer time and this type of thing. So there's not only the set of expectations, but I love working in a framework, right?
And if
And
there's a model somewhere that speaks to that.
yeah, and that it really does frame how you can, interact with
I, I'd love the signaling there too from leadership and from the highest echelons of that organization, where they're saying this is accepted, this is expected, this is sanctioned, and
right.
you are invited in, and we're going to share with each other.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we want to share about us. We want to learn about you, and um, that's just very beautiful.
yeah. Now, there's all kinds of stories that we could tell about things that don't work, and I don't want to end it on that. But I
Well,
think, but I think, like you said, I think asking the questions and having the dialogue and all that stuff is certainly the pathway to understanding and being able to
yeah.
uh, interact. Yeah.
I it makes me think that even if you're not in a place that's quite as um, lived, where it's that open and it's expected that it's that open and respectful and things like that, even if you're an N of one on a team, on a initiative, in a project, whatever, that you can still adopt a humble attitude. You can still adopt a questioning mindset. You can still adopt an approach where it's very much, um, I want to learn about you on my team, or, partner that I'm working with on this project. And I think that even within the most constrictive cultures, that can still go a long way to making that particular engagement, whatever it's a project or an initiative, whatever, you can still make that a little bit more harmonious.
Right, right. I think, yeah. Uh, Ed Shine, actually, I'm glad you mentioned uh, humble, right? Because humble inquiry is a big thing from Ed Shine from back in the 70s, maybe 80s, somewhere around there. So it holds true. As consultants, coming in with we have an idea of our point of view and our how we frame things, but we have to really understand our organization. So coming in with the sense of, well, we don't know what we don't know, asking questions and getting to a point of understanding, you know, somebody's culture, way of working, all that, right? This is part and parcel to, what we do as consultants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, Ben. Well, boy, we could just keep going and going and going, but we can't keep going and going and going because we are at time. So, um, if you are one of our listeners, please like, share, comment on whatever platform you're on. Let us know what you think. Let us know how you're navigating uh, cross-cultural initiatives in your global organization.
Yeah, for sure. Tell us what worked, what challenges we had. Love to hear.
Absolutely. Love to hear. And the world would too. So, all right, folks. Well, until we meet again, make change your friend. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find all episodes, resources, and ways to connect with us at www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love your feedback. Please rate, review, share, and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. And don't forget to add Harmonious Workplaces to your favorites so you're notified when new episodes are released. Again, visit us at www.harmoniousworkplaces.com.